All right, so today I'm going to do my first long form book review. So this is a new one for me, so bear with me. But we are going to discuss The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. Now, I had this book recommended to me in a lot of my menstrual health groups and content. It was recommended a lot there. So I actually did not realize that this book was fiction until I got it from the library and it had the fiction stamp on it. I do read a lot about the menstrual cycle, people who menstruate, how to eat and train with that, because as a fitness trainer, I predominantly work with people who menstruate. And I have found both with myself and with them that figuring out where we're at in our cycle and syncing everything together really is eye-opening, especially coming from an education system that doesn't teach reproductive health in a way that teaches you really anything about your body. All it does is kind of shame you into feeling bad about things that come naturally, that are perfectly natural in this world. So I went into this blind, which is how I go into most books. And let me tell you, it is either, when you go into books blind, it is either the best adventure you're ever going to have or the biggest mistake you have ever made. And there is no in between. This, luckily, was a really awesome adventure. In fact, this might be one of the best books I've ever read, especially as like a historical fiction type. Now, once I finish reading books, sometimes I'll go through and like look at reviews, which is when I realized that this book is a historical retelling of a biblical story. Um, I'm not going to touch on that a whole lot. I am not a biblical scholar. I read parts of the Bible in my youth, but it has been a while, nor do I follow the Christian mythology or faith. So this review isn't really going to touch on the parts of that that I may think are fictional or like tweaks. I am just coming from this strictly from the position of someone who studies menstruation, who studies women's health, who likes stories that talk about women and how they interact with others. So this book happens in four parts. The first part is kind of the origin story. So our main character is who we eventually meet in the second part, but the first part is about her family, her mothers and her father, how they came to be, her grandparents. It's like the origin before it happens. Um, so in this story, her father comes to work because his brother and him got in a fight, and he comes and somehow in a roundabout way ends up married to all four of the daughters. They're the sister wives. And I know how that sounds, but historical fiction, it is what it is. It does kind of in the book make sense because we've seen even like a lot that raising children in a community is so much easier than trying to do it with like a two-person or a single person household. So having those people to help you, even if they didn't always get along, because let's face it, they were sisters. Two of them were real wives. Two of them are like handmaidens, but they called them wives. I was a little unclear on the differences because two of them did not have actual like weddings and marriage ceremonies, but two of them did. And then like one came with them. So it's like, kind of like a buy one, get one twice. I'm not clear on that. And that could just be part of the historical piece that I don't understand. But it wasn't necessarily made clear, but you're also getting it from someone's perspective who would have grown up in that culture. And maybe it didn't really need an explanation because they would get it. Um, but seeing the different realities there of like what happens in a marriage ceremony, what they do when they are pregnant, how they take care of the household, the like duties of women. And we also start to get to see into the red tent. The red tent is where the women go at the new moon, where they bleed. They get to rest. They don't have to do anything. At first, it's just the four wives. Then, as their husband prospers and more like bondsmen come, all of the women go to this tent and they just like eat candy and take care of each other and, socialize and rest, which I really think is something from like a modern perspective that we overlook a lot because typically not everyone, but most people who menstruate, kind of want to like bring everything home, lounge about the week of their period. Like we don't feel great. We kind of just want to be homey, sit in our comfy sweats, watch a show, read a book. We don't take that time to rest. We are push, push, push all the time. And I know that there are some historical, or even like in the menstrual cycle books that talk about how men work on a 24-hour clock where they are productive in the morning, they go tonight, they go to sleep, they repeat. Women work more in a, or people who menstruate work more in like a 28-day cycle. So as our hormones change through our cycle, we have different peaks of like creative energy or high energy or when we want to socialize versus when we want to stay at home. And we've kind of just been put into this system of 24 hours a day versus 28 days a week, a month, and how they should look different. And again, not everyone who menstruates has a 28-day cycle. Some are a little bit longer, some are a little shorter. Um, but you get the idea. And really seeing that they uh, synced up, that they all, we know sometimes they're considered urban legends, but women who hang out a lot or people who menstruate hang out a lot together, a lot of the times their cycles will sync. So it does kind of make sense that all of these people would bleed with the moon. And then there are some traditions that talk about bleeding with the new moon or the full moon. Um, so having that there, we get to see this relationship grow between the mothers and between the mothers and the husband. Two of them are in love with him, we'll say. One of them doesn't really want anything to do with him. She basically does her one time, has twins, and she's done. She just doesn't want to lay with him anymore. And that's fine with him. He has his other two that he likes more. And then the two like non-wives don't get a lot of time. They do have children with him. And they have, I think, 12 sons and then one daughter. And the daughter, one of the things they play on in here is that when you have a son, you have to rest for, I think it's 60 days before you can see the man, or 30 days. And then the daughter is 60 or 90. And their thing is not that having a girl makes you unclean, it's that giving birth to a giver takes more out of you and is more sacred because you're continuing the next line type thing. So that was really interesting to read as well. So then we go into the next part. Our main character, Dinah, is, or maybe it's Diana. It's spelled two different ways in the book, depending on where she's at as the story progresses, is a young child. And you're seeing things from a child's perspective of how the parents interact, how the chores are, and how the multiple 12 children and their different age groups kind of like parry off together, and how she sometimes ends up a lot by herself because she's the only girl. Even the younger boy, they make fun of him if he tries to hang out with his sister. So she, kind of feels a little alienated and has to do this work and just wants to be in the tent with her mom. But for the most part, the kids don't be there. But she gets to be a little bit lucky in that she gets to be in that tent even though she's not menstruating, which is not typical, but she does get to spend a lot of time there. She, before she enters womanhood, gets to see children being born, gets to see some of her brothers and sisters being born, some of the bondsmen. So she kind of grows up into this world a lot faster because she gets to see these things that other kids wouldn't have seen yet, and gets to learn different, like the mysteries of being a woman. Oh, in this second part, we really get to see things from a child's perspective. And they do eventually take a trip with her as a kid. And she talks about seeing all the new things and all of the things going on and meeting the other side of the family and just kind of a real child's perspective of things. So, there's some ruffles between her moms. She does hang out with her aunt more and start to learn with her because she gets frustrated with her mom, which I feel is a normal rite of passage. Even if you don't have multiple mothers, there's just a point in life where you just kind of separate yourself from your mom a little, or you don't believe a thing she says. It's interesting to see that in like an ancient world. So as we move on to the next part, she finally becomes a woman. She talks about the process they go through. So they clean you, they rub your feet. There's a whole process in it. And as they go through like this type of like ceremony, rite of passage type thing, for me, it really brought home how we kind of missed out. Like, had I read this book before the young people in my life had started their cycle, I would have, maybe ritualized it a little bit, like that celebration to move into womanhood. So I kind of compare these four parts as like the origin story is part one, and then you have the maiden, the mother, and the crone. So as she comes into this maidenhood, realizing like what it's like to finally get her to do it, like feeling like she's finally a woman and going through these things. This time that she decides that she kind of wants to be a midwife, learning from her aunt who is also a midwife how to deliver the babies, how to move through these things, at the same time seeing like the struggle between her father and his father-in-law and her father and his brother, and just kind of being afraid of what's to come because it doesn't really feel like they know where they're going. um or what's going to happen, and seeing like all these relationships around her and how they have to move, they have to do these things. It is a lot. And then as we move on into the next chapter, she does meet someone, love match, so excited, but again, her father didn't approve of it first. And she talks about how if one brother had found her first, things probably would have been different. But the brother that is greedy, that just wants money, that is totally okay with taking people and putting them into slavery, those are the ones that find her, that kind of poison her father to this. And um, even her answer, like she's in a love match, she wants to be here, everything's fine. That is not what happens. So, spoiler alert, her father or her brothers come and they basically wipe out the entire city of people that she has now married into. And she didn't have a traditional marriage like her first two moms did. She basically went to the castle, the prince said he liked her, his mom was like, approve the match and sent them to his room, and that's just how they got married. Is the the whole like trend around marriage is kind of confusing in this book because it's not what we traditionally think. It's not really explained, and not everyone gets married in the same way. But they're considered man and wife. They want the father's blessing. Father gives it with some stipulations. They agree, and then the entire basically the city gets wiped out except for our main character, the mother-in-law, and her bodyguard. And so they take her back. She's mad. They did this because she was happy. She was in love, as one would be. Okay. But she goes back to the city. Luckily, the people that find her are the bodyguard of her mother-in-law, and she ends up taking her to Egypt, where she has a son of this man, and he gets to be raised as the mother-in-law's son. So in a much more privileged position than our heroine herself was raised. And she goes through how like she got to spend time with him, she had to do this, and then once he reaches a certain age, he has to go to school to learn how to be a scribe, and he gets taken away. And you kind of see like that sadness of the kids leaving the nest, going to their um to better their future. And it's a little bit different in our culture when we have kids. Like they stay with us until they're 18, sometimes longer. He goes to school, and then they never really see each other a lot of time. They see each other like two or three times throughout the rest of her life. But it's not the same. Like those baby years are gone. He's becoming a man. He's doing things, making a name for himself, going on these adventures, things like that. So she talks about how she doesn't really feel like she fits in. She was brought to another country, she doesn't really know the language. She doesn't want to leave the house, but she does keep being a midwife and becomes known as one of the best midwives. People call her, no matter their station in life, they want her there. She starts training someone else in the house as a midwife as well. And kind of the theme through the whole book is that the women are passing their skills and knowledge on to each other, like how they do ceremonies. At one point, her grandmother uh, throws a fit at her daughter-in-law because she did not give her grandchild the ceremony for when you become a woman, when your menstrual cycle starts, and said that she had ruined her for life because she would never know these rights. So you're seeing a little bit about how like the men in the book don't want these things passed along, or they think they're unclean, or they don't understand them. So then they're getting mad at the women. And then how there are some women who have already taken these ideals and are breaking the cycle with their own kids because they aren't passing along the rights that happened to them, or maybe their moms were from the first generation who didn't do these rites of passage into womanhood. So they were locked away, left in like because they were unclean until they were done, and then we're doing that to their kids. You kind of see like a generational push, as well as a gender push to kind of erase the knowledge that is passed from woman to woman. And this midwife thing is similar because at one point, Dinah has to go help a young girl who is not of what should be an age to bear a child. She is a young girl. She's trying, she dies, the baby dies, and she yells at the priest in the book, and she's like, "This was a child." Like, essentially, like yells at him in her language, kind of like Liz Griffin tells him all the things you would want to tell someone who does something to a child like that, about how horrible person is, how all these bad things are going to happen to him, he's going to reap what he's sown type thing. So as we go through this, she starts to get like the priest won't call her because they're afraid because something like bad things happen to this guy afterward, which is when she decides to go away because the people she's staying with, the husband dies, someone else is going to come in as that, and she doesn't really want to stay there. They don't seem that keen to keep her. So another thing comes up. She does move with them. She does keep being a midwife, but you see her kind of, realize her time here is done. As we move on, she moves with her apprentice and continues to teach them. And then it turns out that as she's with her apprentice, they took her in as well. One of those grandchildren of her apprentice um, kind of, starts hanging out with her and again starts to become apprentice. And we see this cycle of her mother, Rachel, was the apprentice of Inanna. And then Rachel trains Diana. Diana trains two other people, and we kind of see how this is passed on. Now, when we get to the last book, she is a crone. She does reconcile with her family. And by reconcile, I don't mean that she makes amends. I mean, she just goes and sees, and she basically all she knows is, do they remember me? And the brothers don't talk about her anymore. Her dad doesn't recognize her. She doesn't say who she is. She doesn't want them to know. Like, she is done. She has cut ties um, with her family. But as one of the little girls in the village comes to talk to her, starts telling her the story about her family, it does come up about Diana, how she went to marry a prince, how he took her, how they did these things, how he died. And the little girl says, I'm going to name my daughter this someday because I like this story. Not necessarily that she believes it or that she knows it's true, but Diana's just happy to know that there is a piece of her still in her family of her mothers. Because, as she's sitting there, she can see the different pieces of her four mothers and these children, the next generation. So when it does come to the end and our main character passes away, she talks about how she doesn't really move on to the afterlife because she's seen um, bits of herself in the children her sons have, in the children that her mother's other children have, as they name children after her, and how she says there are hundreds of different pieces of me scattered throughout the world, even today. And for me, what that really, really makes me think about, and is that, we come from a lot of matriarchal societies that have since been destroyed or overturned, or how much information we have really lost from our ancestors and from the way things were before. That knowledge that would be passed down from mother to daughter to mother to daughter, um, especially when it comes to things that have to do with our menstrual cycle or childbirth or all of those things. We don't talk a lot about birth stories or like what are like I may know how I was born. I don't know how my mom was born. I don't know how my mom's siblings were born. I don't know those types of things. Like, did they have C-sections? Did they deliver naturally? Did they come early? Um, a lot of the times, and I think part of that too is we have a whole generation of people who like they get pregnant and then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a baby. Um, it's kind of a scary thing now. Even then, like you could have complications and something could happen, but those things still happen today. And we don't necessarily talk about it. We don't talk about those things. They have come out a lot more with the rise of social media. But it's kind of a hidden thing. It's not something we talk about. We don't talk about a menstrual cycle. I know if you followed me, I do talk about it a lot on especially my Instagram channel. Or if you're in person, I do talk about it a lot. And there are a couple creators I follow who do the same thing as they're trying to get that information out there about like treating with your cycle, eating with your cycle. A couple books I always recommend, Roar by Dr. Stacey Sims. In the Flow is another good one for whole life pieces of your menstrual cycle. But there are so many, especially if you're having problems with different aspects of it that can help. But this book for me was more about like the spiritual side and the side that we pass down. Like, what kind of things do we want to pass down to our daughters, to the people who come after us who menstruate? Like, what do we want to teach them? Especially in the current political climate, um, about how our bodies work. Because, I mean, for me, one of the biggest frustrations I have ever had, or probably one of the most I have ever been angry about my education, is every time I learn something about my reproductive system, because it should have been taught that way. And I know, like, one of them is that your fallopian tubes are not attached to your ovaries. Your ovary just kind of like eats your egg and hopes it gets in there. They're like saxophone bells and you have to like get it in there. Or the fact that your ovaries are actually up under your uterus and they're not like up here, they're tucked in under. And that's why your cramps are usually like right where your hip bone is, or where your legs meet your hip. Like mind blowing to learn that like the diagrams in my health books weren't even correct. It's not where they are. Or learning about like the different needs and how things change and that don't get me wrong, birth control is great. Birth control is amazing for what it does in preventing pregnancy and giving us the option to control our reproductive health. But also realizing the things that like I was giving it for because they had heavy periods. And I know some people are giving it for they have acne and it helps with that, but it actually stops your body from cycling hormones naturally. And knowing what I know now, I would still have chosen to use birth control to prevent pregnancy. But I also would have realized that the symptoms I were using it to mask, it was just a band-aid, not a fix. It wasn't fixing anything. It was just stopping whatever was causing it. And then as I've gone through having an ablation, having my tubes removed so I don't have to take birth control, and having to re-navigate all of these problems I thought the birth control fixed, and figuring out that it is literally something as easy as making sure that I'm getting the right nutrition, that I'm getting the right kind of exercising, that I'm giving my body rest, that I'm getting the right vitamins and minerals that my body needs to sufficiently do what it's supposed to. And how many times this woman like endometriosis is undiagnosed a lot. I have ovarian cysts frequently and they don't do anything. Like the first time I had one, I went to the hospital. They don't care. They don't do anything for you. The only time they intervene is if they're so big that they're afraid that something's going to happen and then they'll surgically remove it. Most of them, they just let you be in pain. But there are things that causes those. And there are things that can help, but we're not taught that. And I think this book really hits home for me. The things that we lost that weren't passed from mother to daughter in those histories and oral traditions and ritual traditions, and also the fact that we can change this. We might not be able to reclaim the information that we have lost, but we can give the next generation the information that we are finding right now and giving them that to empower them to move forward, to teach their children, to give them this information, to advocate for themselves, to know what's right and wrong, to listen to their body. And I honestly like this book is so, so good. And you should definitely give it a read. Now, again, I will tell you that it's apparently based on a biblical story. So if any parts of this are offensive to you because it's not following that biblical story to a T, it's beautifully written. The story is amazing. It really makes you think. And that's really all I have for you because I didn't even realize that this was about anything biblical until I read a review by someone else and they were upset about the liberties someone took. But it's historical fiction, okay? And especially from times like this, we don't have a lot of information anyway. So you have to put pieces in. And I really, really liked the story. Watching someone go from like before birth through death, how families are connected. Even in ancient times, we all have problems with our parents. And listen, you should give it a read. I absolutely loved this book. And it's been a while actually since I've read a historical fiction. I tend to hang out more in the romance and fantasy. I have to revisit that because this was really good. So, and that's all I have for you. I hope you like my first long form review. There will be more to come. The next one will probably be For Whom the Bell Tolls. But we'll see you soon.